The rally was electric, packed to the rafters with thousands of supporters waving signs and wearing red caps. A sea of noise and anticipation swelling beneath the stadium's high metal beams. Cameras flashed as former President Donald J. Trump stepped onto the stage, the roar of the crowd washing over him like a thunderstorm of loyalty and fervor. He smiled broadly, the kind of smile that had carried him through decades of business deals, television ratings wars, and relentless political battles. The sun was setting beyond the open-air stadium, casting a golden hue over the sky, and the light touched his face with a glow that almost felt divine. His voice echoed through the massive speakers as he began speaking about America, strength, the economy, and promises renewed. But even as he spoke, something was stirring near the front rows of the crowd, where the Secret Service had been gently parting the masses to allow a small figure forward. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her hair was done up in 2 neat braids, her dress a faded pink with white flowers, and her little shoes sparkled as if they had been chosen carefully just for today. Her name was Lily. She held tightly to her mother's hand as she approached the metal barricade, her face looking up at the towering figure on stage with something more than admiration, something deeper, purer. Trump noticed her. Mid-sentence, he paused, cocking his head slightly and pointing with a bemused smile. "We got a young patriot down here," he said, and the crowd chuckled warmly. "Let's bring her up." The girl hesitated for a split second before the decision was made for her. The crowd parted just enough. A Secret Service agent gently helped her over the barrier, and then another lifted her up onto the stage. She stood before him, small and trembling, her hand clenched into a fist around something shiny, a coin or perhaps a cross. No one could tell yet. He knelt slightly, lowering himself to be eye level with her, the microphone away from his mouth. Now, their eyes met. Hers were wide, full of innocence and curiosity. His, for once, held no strategy, no calculation, just a flicker of something human and unarmored. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Lily," she said, her voice thin but steady. "Well, Lily," he smiled, "you're very brave. What would you like to say?" And then, with all the solemnity of a child who had thought long and hard about this moment, she asked, "Do you believe in God?" The question hit the air like lightning. For a heartbeat, the stadium was utterly silent. Not a cheer, not a chant, not even the shuffle of feet. Just the wind, and Lily, and that question hanging there like an invisible star between them. Trump's face didn't change at first. It remained composed, maybe even caught off guard, but then something shifted, just a flicker around the eyes, a brief shadow of memory or emotion passing through him like a ghost. He stood up slowly, looked out over the crowd, and then back, down at the girl. "That's a very big question," he said, his voice steadier than it had any right to be. He didn't look for the teleprompter. He didn't glance at any aid. He wasn't playing to the crowd anymore. "I've walked through gold-plated halls, Lily. I've stood at the top of skyscrapers I built with my own name on them. I've flown in planes with my initials stitched into the leather seats. I've sat across from world leaders, made decisions that changed countries. And for a long time, I thought all of that meant something on its own. I thought that made me powerful." The crowd listened, hushed now, as if something sacred had just cracked open inside the stadium. "But there were nights," he continued, "nights when I couldn't sleep, nights when everything was quiet, and I was alone with my thoughts. And in those moments, I would ask myself what it all meant. All the success, the battles, the hate, the praise. And I'd remember being a boy, sitting in a little church in Queens, and hearing the preacher talk about something bigger than money, bigger than fame, about a God who saw everything, even the things we tried to hide." Lily looked up at him, still silent, her coin or cross pressed tight in her fist. "Yes, Lily," he said, his voice quieter now, filled with something raw. "I do believe in God. I don't always understand him. I've made a lot of mistakes, but I believe he's real. And I believe he's watching." Somewhere in the crowd, a woman began to cry. Others bowed their heads. Reporters in the press pit looked up from their laptops. Something was happening, and it didn't feel like politics. Trump bent down again, placing his hand gently on the girl's shoulder. "And I believe," he added, "that he speaks through little voices like yours. So don't ever stop asking big questions, Lily. The world needs people who aren't afraid to ask." The applause came slowly at first, as if people were unsure whether clapping would break the spell. But then it rose like a tidal wave, cheers and shouts crashing into the evening sky. Not for a campaign promise or a political victory, but for something far more rare, a moment of truth. Lily didn't flinch at the explosion of sound that followed his words. Instead, she smiled, a small, knowing smile that seemed almost too wise for someone so young. She reached up and opened her fist slowly, revealing what she had been clutching this whole time. It wasn't a coin or a cross, but a tiny silver locket shaped like a heart. It swung slightly in her palm as she held it up, the fading sunlight, catching the metal and making it shimmer. Trump looked down at it, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if it triggered something deep, something buried. He asked her gently, "What's inside?" She hesitated for only a moment before answering, "A picture of my daddy. He died in Afghanistan." The air grew heavy again. The crowd, still and reverent a moment before, now shifted almost imperceptibly. Hands moved to hearts, people exchanged glances, and on Trump's face, the expression changed again, this time to something unmistakably human. He looked at the locket like it was a sacred artifact. "He was a soldier?" he asked. Lily nodded. "He prayed every night," she said. "He told me that even when he was scared, he prayed. And I asked him once, 'What if God doesn't hear us?' He said, 'God always hears little girls, especially when they pray for someone else.'" Trump didn't speak right away. He turned his gaze back out over the crowd, the sea of faces and signs, the flags waving slowly in the breeze. And for once, the moment wasn't about him. It was about a memory of a father's sacrifice, a daughter's faith, and the weight of an answer spoken into a nation that hadn't expected to hear something so raw. He reached into the inside of his suit jacket and pulled something out. It was a small folded square of white linen, his personal handkerchief, embroidered with the initials DJT. He handed it to Lily, carefully wrapping it around the locket in her hand. "Keep this safe," he told her. It's seen a lot, of battles too. The audience, previously held in silence by the sacredness of the moment, now burst into applause again. But it wasn't wild or frenzied. It was soft, solemn, like clapping in a church. People weren't cheering a politician anymore. They were honoring something else, something older, more eternal. Trump stood slowly, one hand still on Lily's shoulder. He turned toward the microphone again, cleared his throat, and when he spoke, there was a gravelly tremor in his voice. "This country," he said, "was built by people who believed in something bigger than themselves. It was built by men like Lily's father, who gave everything they had, not for glory, not for recognition, but for love. Love of country, love of family, love of something eternal." The crowd murmured in agreement, and someone near the front cried out, "God bless her!" He nodded. "And it's kept alive by people like Lily, by her questions, by her faith. That's what America needs again, not just strength and steel, but soul." The wind picked up slightly, fluttering the flags and rustling the banners around the stage. A hush fell over the crowd again as Trump took Lily's hand in his and walked her back toward the edge of the platform, the Secret Service agents already in position to help her down. Before she left, she turned one last time and looked up at him, her mouth moving soundlessly, and then she waved. He watched her go, and something about the way he looked, just for that moment, was not the brash, boastful showman the world had come to know. His eyes were distant, glassy, as though he were seeing something far away, or maybe something long ago. He returned to the microphone, but didn't speak for a long moment. He took in the crowd again, slower this time, softer. "Sometimes," he said finally, "the truth doesn't come from the top. Sometimes it walks up in a pink dress with a silver locket and asks you something no one else ever has the courage to say." The crowd stood, Every person. A full standing ovation rolled like thunder through the stands, not choreographed, not demanded. Just a natural rising to feet, a shared realization that something deeply meaningful had just occurred. Something that would echo beyond the night and the speech and even the man himself. He let it sit there, let it breathe, let them feel it. And then slowly, he stepped back, nodded once, and walked off stage. Not with the swagger of a man who had dominated the headlines again, but with the slow, thoughtful steps of someone who had been reminded that even giants can be humbled by the smallest voices. Backstage, the noise of the crowd still roared like distant thunder, muffled by the thick canvas walls and hum of generators. Trump walked slowly, almost absently, past aides and security agents who gave him space without instruction. He didn't speak. Not yet. He removed his overcoat, handed it off without a word, and sat on a folding chair near a table cluttered with bottled water, cue cards, and untouched snacks. One of his senior advisors approached hesitantly. That was powerful, sir. Trump didn't look up. He was staring at his hands, fingers pressed together, elbows on his knees. That little girl, he said, voice low and rough. She asked me something I haven't been asked in 40 years. Not like that. Not by someone who didn't want anything from me. There was a long pause. The advisor nodded, unsure what else to say. She wasn't trying to trap me, Trump continued. She wasn't trying to make me look weak or holy or anything. She just wanted to know if I believed. He shook his head slowly. And for a second, I didn't think I could answer her. He looked up then, eyes clearer now, but older somehow. You know what I saw in her face? I saw trust. Not in me, not even in the office. In something she still believes the world holds. Something pure. That kind of trust is dangerous and beautiful. Outside, chants had started again. USA! USA! But they sounded different now. Less like a political slogan and more like a heartbeat, steady and unified. Somewhere nearby, a TV played a live stream. News anchors were already calling it the most human moment of the campaign. Unexpected, deeply moving. Trump stood again, walking to the monitor, watching the replay as the little girl held out the locket and asked that piercing question. He watched his own face as it paused, as the wind swept his hair, as his eyes shifted. He watched himself hesitate. That right there, he murmured, pointing at the frozen image of his own unsure expression. That's when everything changed. A moment later, the door to the backstage area creaked open, and in walked Lily's mother, her eyes red from crying but her back straight. She carried Lily in her arms now, the child tired from the emotional tidal wave of the evening. Trump turned, immediately, moved by something unspoken. The mother hesitated, unsure whether this moment was allowed, but he gestured gently for her to come closer. She didn't say much. She wanted to say goodbye. She didn't want you to think she was rude. Lily stirred slightly in her mother's arms, blinking awake. Mr. Trump, she whispered, barely audible. He stepped closer. I'm here, sweetheart. I forgot to tell you, she said, her voice like a thread of silk. When I pray, I ask God to help people who are lonely. His mouth twitched, and the air around them seemed to freeze. I hope he helps you too. No cameras caught that moment. No one recorded it. But those who stood close enough to hear would later recall the silence that followed it, the kind that only happens when two completely different worlds collide and something sacred emerges in the middle. He put his hand over his heart. Thank you, Lily. That might be the kindest thing anyone's ever said to me. The mother nodded once, tears on her cheeks. We're not Republicans, she said quietly. But tonight, I think something happened. Not with politics, with people. Trump didn't respond immediately. He looked down at Lily and then to her mother. Maybe that's the only thing that ever really matters. They left after that. Quietly. The way people leave a church after something holy has been spoken. Trump stood there for a while, arms crossed, eyes locked on the space where they'd just been. One of his aides broke the silence finally, a younger staffer with a clipboard. "Sir, we're ready to debrief. Press wants a quote. They're calling it the Lily moment." He didn't answer right away. Then he said softly, Tell them not everything needs a headline." The aide blinked. "Yes, sir." Later that night, back in his hotel suite, he stood by the window, overlooking the quiet city from 30 stories up. The moon was high, silver against a dark velvet sky. He had a speech on the table he was supposed to review, talking points, for a televised debate. But instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. A scrap someone had slipped to him backstage. It had been folded and smoothed, and inside was a crayon drawing. A stick figure girl holding a heart, standing beside a tall man with yellow hair. Above them, in awkward child handwriting, it read, "God hears us." He stared at it for a long time. Then he folded it carefully, slid it into his wallet, next to a worn photo of his own mother, and sat in silence as the night pressed in, the weight of everything heavier and lighter all at once. The morning sun broke through the clouds with a kind of quiet gentleness, casting a pale amber hue over the city skyline. Trump sat alone at the long glass table in his suite's dining room, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold in front of him. He hadn't slept. Not fully. Dreams had come and gone in fragments. Faces, voices, a little girl's question echoing louder than the applause had ever done. He had always known how to command a room, how to pivot attention, how to dominate headlines. But the night before, Lily had done something he hadn't expected. She had stripped away the armor. She hadn't cared about the myth of him. She had just asked. And something deep inside him had answered before the rest of him had time to filter it. There was a knock at the door. His chief of staff entered, holding a tablet already buzzing with press reports, social media reactions, and column headlines. "Sir, the networks are running wall to wall with last night. They're calling it the most authentic moment of your public life. Even critics are pausing." Trump didn't look up. "Pausing won't last," he said quietly. "No, but it's shaking people. You changed something." Even MSNBC ran the full clip, no edits, just silence at the end. The room was silent. Trump's fingers tapped slowly on the table's edge. "She asked if I believe in God. Not what I believe, not how, just if I do." And for the first time in, I don't know how long, I didn't want to dodge it. The aide nodded, unsure how to respond. Then he added carefully, "There's already talk about revising some of your speech strategy, leaning into this kind of messaging. People are connecting with it. With you." Trump's face changed slightly, just a flicker of something distant and wary. "That's the problem. The minute we turn it into strategy, it stops being real." He stood, walked to the window, and looked down at the street, far below. "I built towers out of stone and steel. I made my name louder than almost any name in the world. But that girl, she showed me there's something taller than all of it. Something higher." The aide looked down at his notes, then gently said, "There's an opportunity here, sir, a turning point." Trump turned from the window, his voice lower now, heavier. "It's not about me. That moment wasn't mine. It was hers. The best thing I can do is not ruin it." Meanwhile, across the country, the story was spreading like wildfire, not through sensational headlines, but through whispers, family conversations, quiet reposts with captions like, "We needed this, I cried, and maybe there's hope." In churches, pastors spoke of Lily's question, not as a political reference, but as a spiritual one. A child reminded a leader, and all of us, that God isn't found in policy, but in presence, one sermon said. At a diner in Ohio, a man in a flannel shirt and MAGA cap sat with a woman across from him who wore a blue Planned Parenthood hoodie. They were strangers, but when the television played the clip again, they didn't argue. They just watched. And for once, they didn't see a politician. They saw a moment that felt human. And somewhere in a small, quiet house outside of Nashville, Lily sat at her bedroom window, swinging her legs and humming softly to herself. Her locket was still wrapped in the handkerchief with the DJT initials, tucked safely in a jewelry box beside her bed. Her mother was on the phone, politely declining more interview requests. "She's tired," she kept repeating. "She's just a little girl. Please let her be that for a while longer." Lily didn't understand why everyone was talking about what she'd done. She had only asked the question her daddy used to ask. And she had wanted to know if someone who seemed so big believed in something even bigger. Back in Trump's suite, the day rolled on. Meetings, calls, briefings, but he kept returning to the moment like a heartbeat. He cancelled an aggressive ad shoot, rescheduled 2 combative interviews. When asked why, he only said, "I think we need a different tone, for now." His staff wasn't used to this version of him. Less fire, more reflection. But it didn't feel like a stunt. It felt like something had cracked. Not broken, just opened. Like a door in the soul that had stayed closed for too long, finally creaked inward. That evening, he requested something unusual. To visit a local children's hospital. No press, no cameras, no branding. "Just me," he told his team. "Me and the kids. Maybe a few coloring books." The hospital visit was quiet and soft. He shook tiny hands, listened to short stories, helped tie shoelaces, even knelt beside a little boy with tubes in his nose and asked if he liked superheroes. The boy had nodded, then whispered, "Are you one?" Trump had laughed, really laughed, and said, "Not even close, but I met a little girl this week who kind of is." On the way out, a nurse thanked him, not because of who he was, but because he had been there, really been present, in a way that mattered to children too young to care about politics. He nodded, humbled in a way he didn't fully understand. As the sun set that night, he sat again by the window of his suite, not writing, not planning, just thinking. Thinking of a little girl with 2 braids and a silver locket. Thinking of the way her question had made everything else, polls, speeches, headlines, feel quiet. And in that silence, he whispered something aloud. No one heard it but the glass and the stars. "I hope God hears her too." The days that followed weren't filled with fireworks or sweeping declarations. There was no viral slogan, no sudden pivot in political messaging. Instead, there was a quiet shift, subtle, nearly invisible to the casual observer, but unmistakable to those who had followed Trump for years. He spoke less with bombast and more with gravity. He still rallied, still fought, still stood tall on stages, but something in his voice had changed. It carried less of a sharpened edge and more of a lingering echo, like he had touched something eternal and couldn't let go of its weight. The clip of Lily asking her question was now etched into digital history, played millions of times, analyzed, debated, memed, and revered. But it wasn't what he said that carried the story forward. It was the silence that followed. That moment, between question and answer, when the world had seen a man stop pretending he had all the answers. Faith leaders called it divine interruption. Political analysts called it a vulnerability breakthrough. But for Trump, it was just truth. He continued to carry Lily's crayon drawing in his wallet. In the chaos of briefings and the noise of campaign stops, it became his strange little ritual. When the room emptied, when he was alone between events, he would take it out, look at it, and remember that a little girl believed enough to ask, what no one else had dared. Some nights, he would pick up the phone and scroll through news segments, but never play them. Instead, he'd replay the memory in his mind, the sound of her voice, the soft sway of her locket, the way she looked at him not as a billionaire, not as a politician, but as a person who might need God just like everyone else. One evening, weeks after that rally, he sat backstage again, waiting to speak. This time, it was in a smaller town. No lights, no thunder, just folding chairs in a gymnasium. A local pastor had been asked to offer a blessing before Trump took the stage. The pastor spoke briefly about the importance of humility, of leadership, guided not by ego, but by compassion. Then he looked over at Trump and said, "We are all shaped by the questions we allow to change us." Trump rose slowly, walking to the podium with less of the usual showmanship. He looked out over the modest crowd and spoke with a different kind of authority, not from his chest, but from something deeper. "I've stood before roaring crowds and quiet rooms. I've debated, shouted, laughed, fought. But the moment I keep returning to, every day now, is when a child asked me if I believe in God." He paused, scanning the room, his eyes softer than anyone could remember seeing. I told her the truth. "I do. But I also realized something else. Sometimes we need someone small to remind us that belief isn't about what we say when we win. It's about what we cling to when everything else fades." He adjusted the microphone slightly, then continued. "That little girl, Lily, she lost her father in a war he fought for this country. But she didn't lose her hope. She didn't lose her faith. And that's what we're fighting for now. Not just jobs, not just borders, but the soul of a country that needs to believe again. Not just in leaders, not even just in each other, but in something higher, something that listens." The applause wasn't deafening this time. It was slow, respectful, and tearful. In the back row, an elderly woman clutched her rosary. A young father wiped his eyes while holding his son on his lap. After the event, Trump returned to his car. Before getting in, he looked up at the stars scattered across the night sky like diamonds tossed across velvet. He closed his eyes for a long moment and whispered, "Are you listening now?" Somewhere out there, maybe something was. Back in Nashville, Lily was asleep, her silver locket beneath her pillow and a new drawing taped to her wall. This time, a tall man and a little girl holding hands, standing beneath a giant sky where the words "God hears us" were drawn in rainbow letters. Her mother watched her sleep, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks, knowing that her daughter had unknowingly changed something much larger than one man. And maybe that was always how it worked. Not with declarations, not with power, not even with fame, but with a question whispered from the heart of a child and the courage to answer it honestly.